So we start by creating a project. I'm going to use the NCS project tool that is bundled with NSO to create my project structure. So I call this the Access project. And as you can see here, the NCS project tool has created a basic structure for me with an ncs.conf, meaning I can start NSO in here. It has pre-created, for example, the packages directory and so forth. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a Git repository in here. It's very important to version control all the files in a project like this. What I'll do is I'll call git init to create an empty repository. When building and running this, it will generate files in, for example, the logs directory that I don't want to version control. I will therefore create git ignore files in the directories where files that I don't want to version control are created. So this will simply create git ignore files in the CDB directory, in the state directory, and in the logs directory. And these git ignores basically say ignore all files but the git ignore file itself. The NCS project also creates setup.mk files. This is a dynamically generated makefile that is included. I don't want to version control that either, so I'll add this to my local git ignore. With that in place, I'm now ready to add all the files to Git. And I'll just commit this, calling it my first commit. With that in place, we now have a good starting point for our project, and I can actually call make all start, which will start up NSO for me, like that. The next step is to install the iOS.NET that we will use in this project. I have previously downloaded the site installer, and now I will now unzip that in a temporary directory. So this will generate the a normal tar zip in here that I will then unzip in my packages directory. The reason I unzip it is because the NCS project tool needs the iOS.NET or NNED in an unzipped format. So with that in place, I can remove the temporary directory like this. The next step is to add it to the project metadata file so I can have the makefile generate the netsims for me automatically. So what I've done here, I've added the netsim instruction to create two devices and prefix them iOS, meaning that I will have two devices called iOS 0 and one called iOS 1. I've also added it like this as a local package so that it's covered by the makefile. So with that in the project metadata, I can do an NCS project update -yes just to overwrite the setup.mk file. And now I can actually do make netsim. So that will create the two devices for me. Please also note that it creates an init file. So this file contains all the configuration needed for NSO to be able to connect to these netsims. So after that, I'll do a netsim start like that. And now if I go into the CLI, I'll start by doing a common mistake that I do all the time. So I go into config mode, I do a load, merge, let's see a CDB, netsim devices in it. And now we receive an error. And the problem is that I haven't told NSO to reload the packages, so it doesn't know about the iOS NID yet. So I'll exit this, I do a packages reload. That went well, so back into config mode and load merge. So what I've done now is I've imported the devices, so I can do a devices list, and I can see them in here. So last thing I'll do is I'll sync from them to update the config in NSO. And there we are. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to get a configuration like this loaded into NSO using the NetSims. So what I'll do is I'll open up a CLI to one of the NetSims. I'll choose the iOS 0 version. What I'll do then is I go into config mode and I'll do a load merge on that file that I had, which is called device config. Here we can see the configuration loaded into the NetSim. So what I'll do is I'll commit this, I'll quit the NetSim and go into the NSO CLI, and I do a devices, device iOS 0 sync from. Now if I look at the running config of that device, I'll see that it has actually synced all the configuration, for example the polyser here. So with that in place, we are actually ready to start creating our service. To do that, I will export this configuration into an XML file and we'll use that XML file as a service template later on. I do that by piping it to display XML and then save it, giving it a file name. So I'll just call this iOS 0 config.xml. And that file will look like this. So what I'll do is I'll start cleaning it up a bit, removing anything that's not related to our service. This is our switch port interface, so I'll keep that. This is the trunk port, I'll keep that. The VLAN in the service is 607, so I'll just remove the other ones. So by doing this, I now have a configuration file that we can use as a basis for the service. So let's take this and create a service. Here I'm going to use the NCS make package to create a service called access, which will be a simple template-based service. So this creates an access directory, and if we look at that, we'll see that it has created a bunch of files. So again, had this been a real project, I would have added the access directory to Git to have this version control as well. So with that in place, I'm gonna start looking at the configuration again and see how we can get that into the service template and add the access package as a local package as well. like that. So what I'll do is I'm going to copy this configuration into the service template and then start modeling in Yang, and at the same time replacing, for example, the hard-coded iOS 0 here for a variable. Let me start by opening up the Access Projects template. To this one, I'm going to remove this that was auto-generated, switch back to this and copy this entire thing. Into this. Okay, so what I'll do here is I'm going to open up the Yang file. So here, the first thing I'll do is I'm going to place this leaf list with just a simple leaf. So it will only be one device. So after doing that, I will switch out the iOS 0 to refer to that value. The next thing I see that we need is a customer name. And I will actually use the name in here to refer to the customer name. So I'll just change this to customer name like that. Same thing there. And now I'll replace, so if we search for customer A in here, see that it's used at some different places in the configuration. So what I'll do is I'll replace customer A with an XPath expression referring to customer name. Like that. Okay, so the next thing we want to add as a parameter is the VLAN. So same thing here, we have the value 607. So I'm gonna add that as a parameter to the Yang model. Let's call it VLAN. Make it a mandatory value. And I just make it a UN16 for now. So again, I'm gonna replace 607 with VLAN. So all the places it says 607, it will now use the value VLAN. And the last thing we need to fix are the names of the gigabit Ethernets. So this is the trunk, and this is the access. So I'll simply add two more leaves here. So I call this the access interface mandatory true. I'll make a copy of the trunk interface. So just call these as strings. So here I can enter, for example, gigabit Ethernet 0/1. And what I'll do is I'll use an XPath function called substring to get the name out of that. So what I'll do is I'll call substring on access interface and remove the first 16 characters. So that will convert gigabit Ethernet 0/1 to just 0/1. And now I'll do the same thing here, but instead of the access interface, I'll use the trunk interface. So with that in place, I think we have everything we need in our template ready. So what I'll do again is I'll run NCS setup update -y to create the NSO-project update -y, like that. And now I can make this access package. Went well. So let's go into the CLI and do a packages reload. I'll also look at the packages status to make sure everything is good, and it looks good. So now I should have an access service. I'll give this the customer name Cisco. Go with device iOS 1, VLAN 1000, access interface, gigabit Ethernet, and the trunk port. Now if I do a commit dry run, I can actually see that I have a working service that will send this configuration to the iOS 1 device, set up the policy, set up the VLAN, and so forth. That looks good. I'll just commit it. And with that in place, we have a working service in NSO.